Hello, hello. In this video, I'm going to talk about yarns, yarn substitution, and then work up a swatch for our cardigan that is the Little Fluffy Clouds cardigan. I want to show you how this stitch pattern works so that when you make the cardigan following the written pattern, you know exactly what you're doing, where you're putting your stitches, and also you're making your swatch so that you can check your gauge and know that your measurements for the stitch counts are the same as mine, because you don't want to end up with a cardigan that is too big or too small. So we really want to make this gauge swatch so that you have a gauge that matches the one in the pattern. To do that, I'm gonna make my gauge swatch in the same yarn as one of my cardigan samples, which is Sirdar Country Classic double knit. And I found that to get gauge, I needed a 4.5mm hook with this particular yarn. However, when I made this one, I think I only used a 4mm hook and I came up with the same gauge. This yarn is the same as this turquoisey blue. It's Get Your Fluff On from Hobbycraft. It's a very fine looking double knit, but it's got a good halo on it, and that halo fills out all the gaps and creates a much more plump yarn than it looks like when you're working up your cardigan. It's very lightweight, but it still matches gauge, even though this one's a heavier yarn. So you've got a lot of meterage per 50 grams for this one in comparison to this. What I'm not going to do is give yarn quantities for all the other kind of variations that you could use, because then literally we'd be here forever. There's so many options. But if you didn't or couldn't get hold of the yarns that I've used in my pattern, you can substitute it. Perhaps try a different double knit. Try a 4mm hook, try a 4.5, something in between, and hopefully you'll get gauge with the hook size that you choose. I've swatched before. I think this is it's either Rico Baby or Drops Baby. I can't remember, but it's fatter than a 4-ply fingering weight style yarn. It's more like a sport weight, and I held it in my swatch with the alpaca, the brushed alpaca from Drops. The combination was slightly larger than my swatch. So what I might recommend you do is either go down a hook size and perhaps you'll meet gauge. This is it's subject to each individual, I'm afraid. So you know what works for me may not work for you. Perhaps if you had lots of this Drops Baby or whatever it is, I'm sorry, maybe I'll be able to find out for you in just a moment what that one is. I'll put it on the screen if I know. But perhaps when you hold it with the brushed alpaca, you do get a swatch that's slightly larger. So why not try and hold it with the Kid Silk mohair instead? Those combined, you'll meet gauge perhaps if the other one's slightly larger. Perhaps you've got a plain yarn that's finer than this. You need to bulk it up a little bit, and the brushed alpaca will work brilliantly when combined together. So maybe you want to try Drops Nord alongside the brushed alpaca. Here is a swatch. It is a little bit about experimenting. This is a swatch with the Drops Nord, slightly different shade to that one, Drops Nord with the brushed alpaca, and that was a lovely match actually. So despite all my waffle about you trying different weight yarns to meet the perfect combo, this one worked well for me. So it was the Drops Nord with the Drops brushed alpaca, and that worked up quite nicely. And you've got a two-tone colour there as well, because I didn't purchase this specifically to gauge swatch for the cardigan, so I just grabbed from stash and tried to match as closely as possible. So it wasn't a perfect match, but if you don't perfectly match it, at least you can see that actually a little two-tone isn't a bad thing. Right. Hopefully that gives you the confidence to play around with different combos of yarns. If you want to do a fluffy one, let's not get your fluff on, but you can hold two yarns together. But let's crack on with the swatch. Slip knot on hook. And then we're going to work 31 stitches. Now I use foundation starts for a lot of my projects, and that's what we're going to do here. So it's chain 2 and then second chain from hook, yarn over and pull through, chain 1 and then yarn over and pull through both. And now that has created a little space, area, loop, chain. There's the chain we made, loop behind it. We're going to work into that section and then pull through, yarn over and pull through that, and then chain 1 and then yarn over and pull through 2. And then that process is all about how you create your foundation row. I do go into this in more detail in the other video that I link, because I talk about it in more detail and I show it more thoroughly. I'm not going to do much detail on that in this video, seeing as I've already done it before. So you do this for your swatch and for the first section of the cardigan. The first section of the cardigan is the back piece, and so to create that we work a foundation row just like this. I think it might be the only time that we need to do it in the cardigan as well, because the rest is joined onto that back piece. So you work 31 stitches for the swatch in this manner. So here are our 31 stitches, and so this is the first row of the swatch. To begin the next row, we chain 1. Oh, I think I've accidentally already done it. So we chain 1 to begin the first row, and I do it with a little bit of hook height, and then turn, and then work 1 UK treble, US double into the first stitch. And having that height means that just one chain isn't too short and stubby, bringing the whole thing down. It's just, that's how I prefer to work it, and I think it looks fine and neat and tidy without having the baggy 3 chain there. I know there are other methods, but for this pattern and a couple of my other ones, I find it works quite nicely. So that's the first stitch there, and we want to create 4 more. So we've got 5 in a row at the beginning. And you may be able to hear my children, they are upstairs, and because it's a strike day, the teachers are on strike, so the children are learning upstairs on their computers. Okay, so in the next 2 stitches, we leave those blank, and then the one next to those 2 stitches, we're going to work a trio of puff stitches. And then chain 1 between them all. So that's 1 puff stitch made. So I don't know if you saw what I did there, but it's yarning over, popping through and pulling through, popping through and pulling through 4 times. So you do that that was once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. Then you yarn over and pull through all of those loops, chain 1. So you have a trio of puff stitches in one stitch there. You missed the next 2 stitches, 1, 2, and then it's 3 UK trebles, 3 US doubles, same thing. And the pattern repeat is essentially the puff stitches and the, oh, I've done those 2 in the same space, whoops. I'm very good at getting things wrong and then ripping out the whole thing and going over my mistakes. This is the pattern repeat essentially. The stitch repeat is the trio of puffs and then the 3 trebles. Don't miss 2 stitches and then another trio of puffs. 2, 3, 4. Sometimes you need to wriggle the hook through them, especially with the fluffier yarns. Occasionally the halos catch on the hook, so you end up doing it a couple of times to get it just right, but it's worth paying attention to. And then, as with a lot of crochet, the more you do it, the quicker you get, and the more natural that stitch becomes. And then, so you repeat that to the end, and then I do think that when I've seen puff stitches made in a lot of other patterns, including some of my own, quite often you just repeat the process of making a puff so that you do this bit, this yarning over and pulling through, only 3 times. However, because I've used the puff stitch quite a lot, that was only 3 times, I want to do it 4. Because I've used the puff stitch quite a few times, it's very dainty. I don't even know how many that was because I'm talking. It's very dainty, and here I want a kind of like a big bold motif that's poking out, not one that's flat and timid. I want it to be poofy and sticky outy. You can see actually that if I hold, I wonder if I can hold it on its edge. You can see that it's kind of like a relief stitch a little bit there. And this is the side that is determined to be the right side within the pattern, by the way. So the side where you've got all of that beautiful texture and tactile stitches, because it's so pretty. And also, when you make the cardigan, I do it also, it's upside down, because I think they just look lovely. That's what my eye went, oh yeah, I like that, I'm going to use that. So traditionally speaking, maybe this would be considered to be the right side. And yeah, it looks nice, but it hasn't got the same impact. It looks all right on camera, but in real life it's more timid, whereas this has got more oomph to it. Anyway, I digress, sorry. So let me carry on with my stitches and try and count this time. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then at the end of this row, it's 5 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we're going to work a row of UKDC, which is USSC. And I'm going to show you where these are placed because this is important. It's reasonably easy to add too many stitches here, so I'll just show you where they're placed so you know what you're doing when it comes to making a cardigan. So the first 5 stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, are just bog standard stitches. So work a stitch into each of those. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now here's where I think it's possible to add stitches where you don't want them to be. Each puff stitch is made up of all of those kind of long pulls and then a chain 1. And so the anatomy is the puff stitch and the chain 1. Because if you were to turn it around, you make your chain 1 after you've done all of those. So effectively, in the pattern, I call this bit here the top of the puff stitch. That's where you work the next stitch. Then you're going to work into the gap between puffs, and in the top of the middle puff stitch, then a stitch in between, and then one on top of the last one. And then here is where I figured that maybe sort of naturally you would want to put your hook into this bit here, but this is arguably kind of like part of the construction of a puff stitch in that it's a surplus chain. But if I were to put a stitch in there, it would throw our stitch count out of whack. So I'm going to ignore this little space here. That's nothing. It means nothing to me. And then I'm going to go in top of the next 3 stitches. 1, 2, 3. And then again, it's top, middle, top, middle, top. Ignore that bad boy and go 1, 2, 3. And then for the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stitches across the top of those. So this is 2 rows down into our swatch. Nice loose chain to begin. Not crazy loose, but you know, reasonably loose. Not super tight is what I mean. And then chain, 1 treble in the first stitch. Miss 2 stitches, and then you make your trio of lovely puffs here. And that way our motifs are staggered, not sat on top of each other. Oops. And then you miss 2 stitches, 1, 2, and then 3 UK trebles, which are 3 US doubles. And so it's a lovely little pattern repeat. It's very simple, easy to remember. And this stitch is used on the back, the front panels and the sleeves. And what I'll do is do a separate video for the construction of all of that jazz. So miss 2 stitches. Oops, 1, 2, 3. And you can see that basically the puff stitches sit nicely on top of that central stitch in the gathering of 3. You may actually want to practice working with a non-fluffy yarn. If you want to use some fluff, try working just a few rows. You could even work a swatch size sample in a less fluffy yarn, just to become confident with the stitches before you start on the project properly. If you ever feel that your puff stitches are tricky to work, and you find yourself kind of fighting on, especially on the pull through, you find yourself fighting through some of those stitches. You can wriggle your hook through them, and then at this stage, if your yarn moves beautifully, nice gliding through all of those stitches, then you can be pretty confident that you've caught all of those loops. If it's snagging and it doesn't feel right, undo it and start again, because the chances are you haven't caught all of the loops and it's snagging on something. Okay, so here we have 1, 2, 3 stitches at the end. So yarn over, a tiny sparrow has just hopped down on the patio right outside where I'm sat. They're collecting for their nest building. Is it the 1st of May or 2nd of May today? Whatever it is, they are gathering fluff, not this fluff, outdoor fluff like feathers and moss and dried grasses to make their nests. So, oh, another one's just joined them. I don't know if they're boys or girls. That's row 3 done. And then, as before, it's a row of the DC stitches, SC stitches if you're from the US, using US terms. So in the first stitch, you're going to do your lovely first stitch, then the top of the puff, in the middle of the puffs, oops, top of the puff, middle of the puff, and then the top. As before, no, we're not interested in you. Move on to the 3s. And so on. And so it's just a 4-row pattern repeat. So I'd work this row, then I'd go back to row 2, work that, and then once your swatch is done, it'll look something like this. Mine is washed and blocked, so that when it comes to measuring how many stitches I need based on the pattern, I can work it out from this, because this is a decent sized swatch. If your swatch is too small, it's not going to help you know accurately how much your stitches are. And the other tip I would suggest you do, that once you've blocked it, take it, like leave it to dry in its pins and everything, and then once it's dry and you've taken out all its pins, leave it for about 2 days just to relax, because sometimes I think we're quite eager beavers and we want to get started straight away. And I know, I've been there, I know what it's like. But ultimately, if you leave this, it's going to relax into what is its final state, not what you want it to be as soon as you've taken all the pins out. So just take your time, be prepared, and you'll be fine. So that is how you make the swatch. Hopefully the waffle about yarn substitutes wasn't baffling, because I know I went on about swapping over the different yarns for this, that and the other. And I keep bashing the camera with my head because it's right over my right ear. Thank you very much.